that people are high performing and they become fixated on what they're doing and they perhaps lose sight of the bigger picture.
Welcome back to part 2 of our conversation with Ben Hawkins from Williams Racing Formula One team.
Let's talk about, I've heard you say a couple of times, and as part of your value system, about lifelong learning. Give us a bit of insight into what that means to you, and then what do you do? Because this is something that people will be striving for. You know, learning and development is a big sector now in terms of businesses trying to develop their team. So what does that mean to you, and how do you implement that? How do you make it happen?
I think it's the single most important thing behind everything that I believe in, because we talked about perception shift. We talked about a number of different theories, if you like, or different things that I've applied to myself, but that's all come from being constantly curious, wanting to learn, wanting to develop. And yeah, it could be like, I think we all have a similar trait in that we're passionate about this form of learning and about how to help people and about leadership and development. But it doesn't have to be that. It could be anything that you just always open to more information. And I say, when I'm speaking to HR and we're going out to the market to recruit somebody, values are the driving force behind it. We want someone that's going to fit our environment. I'm also a big believer of always wanting somebody, or being open and not afraid to have someone that's better than me at what they do, because if not, why would I be hiring them? But the last piece of that sort of puzzle when I'm going and looking for someone is, I want them to be constant. I want them to be curious. I want them to want to learn. When we go out and we look for someone, we're saying we want someone who ideally loves what we do, and that's that passion piece. But more importantly is that purpose and that desire to want to improve. I very controversially believe that most jobs in the world anyone can do. I've been challenged on it loads, but I do genuinely, and I don't know if it's because the lens I look at, that I have imposter syndrome, and I do some jobs that I think before I do them, I think I can't do that. And then when I do it, I'm still thinking, should I be doing this? And then I'm getting positive reinforcement that I'm actually doing a good job. So therefore I'm like, okay, I think anyone could do it with the right mindset. Don't get me wrong, there are some jobs I'm not going to start trying to do brain surgery on you. I do know the brain, actually, that wasn't my degree, but I don't have a steady hand. But recruiting based on the person, because if you've got a willingness to learn and you've got some of the things we spoke about, that's so important. And that's why I put lifelong learning at the forefront. And it is just that being curious. It doesn't matter what it is, it's just that willingness to want to take on new information. And not all the information you take on is going to be useful, but that's part of the fun as well, in terms of just challenging what you believe. And I need to stay away from trying to like quote things or saying things verbatim, but it's like, I know, cast my mind way back now to my degree, but if you like schemers and you live your whole life believing that all swans are white, and then one day you see a black swan, what happens now to that idea that you had in that schema? It challenges everything, and some people can't cope with that. But actually, I come from a science background, even though I love the people side and everything seems quite fluffy. My background is science. I did the science version of a psychology degree because I love the idea that my dissertation's out there for anybody to read, and it was correct at the point that I published it. But someone could disprove that tomorrow, and I'm completely open to that. And I'd love to read what they've found, just because it gives me that different perspective, and that's how I'm going to learn.
Yeah, and I think that really links in well. We have a model, awareness, responsibility, that's mentioned earlier, that actually awareness creates those options for you that allows you then to make a choice of the action that you're going to take, and then that's where it links into the responsibility. So what tips have you got for people to gain that awareness so then they've got more options open to them?
Yeah, I think again, my wife's going to hate me for mentioning her, but we've had a conversation multiple times around a number of like issues that I would never expect me and my wife to talk about. She's not as interested in at this stuff as I am. I don't think many people are, to be honest, but I could bore her with it. Or like, I taught sociology as well as psychology. So that's where a lot of my thinking comes from in terms of like understanding my perspective, the lens in which I see the world, the privilege in which I have based on my skin colour, my gender, whatever it may be. And I think the starting point is to actually be it's funny, you asked about self-awareness, but you have to be aware enough to recognise your lens before you can start anything. And the problem is that's really, really hard, because I don't know you incredibly well. Obviously, we've only just met, but like, I'm probably sat in a room with like-minded people that haven't grown up geographically too far away from me. Industry-wise, I mean, it's crazy. We haven't touched on it, Dan, but you're mentioning health and fitness, you're mentioning rugby. We've actually probably had quite a similar journey to where we are now. So therefore, if I surround myself with people like you, you've probably got a similar lens, growing up in a similar culture to me. So therefore, I'm never challenging the way I see things. And you could go through a lot of your life never having experienced that. I was fortunate enough to work in football and in education, two industries where you get exposed to a lot of cultures. That's what helped me. And that's what made me start thinking, because it's easy at times when you're doing well or you're getting positive reinforcement to actually think my way's the right way. And the only way you learn is through failure. And it sounds incredibly big-headed, but I haven't failed in a catastrophic way very much in my life. I've been quite fortunate. I've been successful in most of the sort of adventures and different projects that I've done. So you don't learn much if you're not failing. I mentioned being in a rugby team that lost all the time. I learned a lot about myself then. But if you're not learning through failure, you need to be learning through experiences and different things. And that's my advice to people, is open your eyes to a number of things. If you don't have a number of different cultures available to you, or different thinking, or you've been in one job all your life maybe, which I have huge respect for as well. But if you don't have those different opportunities, seek them out. Whether that's gaining experience somewhere, whether that's listening to podcasts, reading books, or just watching something different. I've learned a surprising amount, dare I say it, from Netflix, and particularly working in sport, watching the behind-the-scenes documentaries that, although they're I shouldn't say, but they're scripted to an extent, but they're still open all areas. What you're seeing is real. The narrative they put behind it maybe isn't, but what you're seeing is real. That gives you the opportunity to work in a football club. If you haven't worked in a football club, at least you get to see what's happening there. And that's my advice to people, is just open your eyes to more things.
So it's linking into recognising unconscious biases and how we've grown up. And I think you talked a little bit about learning from failure, and that you haven't had too many big failures to learn from. But is there that reason that you haven't had those big failures is because you've learned before making those choices? So you've surrounded yourself with those right people to broaden that horizon, again, gain more awareness that's allowed more options for the choices that you're going to make to allow them to become a success.
Yeah, I mean, as cliche as it sounds, I don't believe in luck. I think it's from a racing perspective anyway, it's when preparation meets opportunity. You've got to be ready for it. When that gap opens, you take it. Someone else makes a mistake, you capitalise on it. So I am getting to a stage, probably for the first time in my career now, where I'm starting to look back and go, I certainly don't think I was, now I've got to a point, I certainly don't think I was lucky to get to where I am. I think there's a reason where I've got to where I am. But I do also think that I can't sit here and say, oh yeah, I haven't failed because I'm mega and I've just done everything right, because I haven't. But what I've done is I've been aware enough to notice when there's been a small setback or a small failure, and I have them every single day. Like, there's mistakes that I make, but I'm aware of that and I accept that, and I want that responsibility piece. I'm like, okay, no, that was on me, but actually I can't bury my head in the sand, because if I do, this is going to snowball, and this will be my first catastrophic failure in my professional career, and I don't want that. So I'm just going to take it on the chin. I'm going to own it. I'm going to accept it, and I'm going to do what I can to either rectify it or to take the consequence that's come of that. And it might be that there is a missed opportunity, but I've missed one opportunity rather than completely slamming the door in my face.
I'll never forget Clive Woodward, the England rugby coach, talking. It's about 18 months out from 2003 World Cup, which they ended up winning, and he was interviewed on BBC by John Inverdale, and it just lost the Six Nations match. So chance of a Grand Slam where you win all of the games, that's gone. And he sat there being interviewed, and John Inverdale said, how do you take that loss? That must be an absolute nightmare for you. He was like, that's the best thing that could have happened to this team. And I remember people thinking at the time and saying, like, that's mad. We've just thrown away the opportunity of a Grand Slam, which doesn't come around that often. And you're talking about a loss being a good thing. What about the fans? We want you to win every single game. But actually, you fast forward 18 months, and it was the best thing because there was more learning from that failure, that one match that they lost by whatever, 5-10 points, whatever it was. That you're right, it wasn't catastrophic, but it felt like it in that moment, and you learn from that, and then you take that learning forwards. How does that play out in terms of high performance? So you work in that high performance environment, you work with some self-centered people, some egotistical people that are there for themselves? Like how do you manage that in terms of high performance?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to go over Jose Mourinho quote and say, if I speak, I'm in big trouble. But if they listen to this, then I'm a happy man that they're thinking outside of their box. But yeah, I do, naturally. And I think we can't be too critical when you talk about high performers, and particularly in elite sport, but equally in business. Some of their character traits might be seen as negative, but it's what makes them successful. Yeah. So self-centered has negative connotations, but actually they're just incredibly driven and they're hyper-focused. But what that does mean is it's a harder task for me to try and get them to kind of break out of that tunnel and see other things. But it's also a delicate balance, because if I take them out of that can hurt their performance as well. So it's trying to work out when and where. You mentioned in Sir Clive, I mean, that's someone that I've studied a lot and looked at, and we actually did his football qualifications at a school that I worked at. He's a very, very interesting guy in terms of his background into coaching. It's something I can relate to, and what you mentioned there about the Six Nations, I can really relate to what he's saying, and it's one of the biggest challenges of working in high performance, particularly as a head coach or a team principal or whatever it may be, is that I feel the same way as Sir Clive does there. And I would probably, and have done, said the same in the media. But I also get it from your point when you be like, what's this guy on about? Like, we never want to lose. We want to win every single game. Actually, if fans really looked at it, they don't want to win every single game. They think they do, but it's not actually what they want. But still there's that pressure, because that's what they expect the manager to say. And it's that, going back to my rugby example earlier, they expect you to say, yeah, no, Martin Johnson wasn't good enough today. Lewis Moody didn't do this, and we didn't do that. We need to be better. And they want it to be negative because they want to have a reason. It's almost like a breakup. They want to have that kind of closure to go, okay, that's why we didn't win, but he knows what he's doing and we're going to get it right next time. I've been happy in times when my team have underperformed in something because I felt we needed it. My director will probably question me a little bit as to why I'm happy, but we've got an understanding and he knows the way I work, and once we've had a conversation, he'll get it. But then I've got the commercial department that are like, it doesn't work for us. Our partners want you to be winning. They certainly don't want you saying that it's good that we've lost. So it's that balance. And then you've got marketing going, what am I going to put on social media when we expected to win this and we haven't? And I'm going, you put the actual result. You put the result. Do you want some context to put with it as well? Because here you go. I'll give you a couple of lines now. I'll tell you what's happened in that thing. Tell the fans the truth. But it's a really difficult balance to be in. And particularly when you're working with such driven, I know you mentioned, like you said, self-centered, but such driven individuals, that they are results focused regardless of what we say to them. And culture, they're hardwired to be that way. And you don't want to completely take that out of somebody. But you also need to protect that individual by changing their locus of control slightly. So changing the way in which they see things, and actually give them, when things go wrong, there is an element of you want them to kind of, especially in racing, they can actually attribute it to something other than themselves, but you want them to be able to do that in the times when it actually is relevant. So you want them to go, your performance today deserves much more on merit than what you achieved. Your result isn't everything. Again, I can't remember. I think it was Ellis Genge. It was one of the current England players actually that said, Like, all I ever wanted to do was win this competition. But that was, I thought, was a great motivator. And then I won that competition. And then I find myself in this lull of like, what do I do now? And a lot of elite performers are in that situation. And I'm pretty sure I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but I think it's all relevant for me when we're talking about that high performance culture and the individuals that might sit within it.
Johnny Wilson said exactly the same after, again, 2003 World Cup. Kicks the winning drop goal, euphoria, something they've been building towards for the last, 4 or 5 years or so. And he gets that moment and the whole world is amazing. And he says literally like 2-3 minutes later, back to reality. Like, that moment's gone, you move on. So you move on really quickly. How do you cope? What do you do with the people in your team? Like, how do you drive them towards that high performance? Because I'm thinking when we then look at business aspects, you look at sales as a good example of that we're trying to meet these targets and we miss. And we can put that down to, your behaviours weren't good enough, you weren't performing in the right way. And we take things personally. There'll be a lot of people that listen to this that will take those knockbacks really personally. So how do you help your team move on from those moments?
Yeah, I think it starts initially with the helping the team trust the process. And that's so important. I think it's also worth saying it's okay to hurt after a setback. And I think a lot of people, again, that's something that leaders are also scared of, in terms of we're trying to be ultra positive and we're trying to be like, no, don't worry. And it's like, you've got two extremes, haven't you? You've got you should feel that way because you've just cost us X, or you've got the arm around the shoulder, it's all right, don't worry about it, it doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. And there's a reason you were set that target, because it does matter somewhere. So actually, I don't think it's right to tell somebody that. Allowing them to hurt. Again, I always default to rugby as something I know, but like, if you've lost a game, you've lost a game. You've gone out to achieve one thing and you haven't achieved it. You need that reflection time. Reflection's so important. And if you just move past it straight away, you haven't reflected, you haven't learned from it. You either win or you learn, essentially. And if you're not learning, then you are losing. So therefore, I think it's really important to allow the team that time. Once they have, it's about, okay, what do I need to do now to anchor them back to where they were? And it's all, for me, proactive rather than reactive in the ideal situation. You've got a process, it's very clear, people trust it, they know what you're working towards, and what you're working towards isn't a singular thing. It's that continuous development, but also giving them strategies to anchor themselves and understand themselves, because what works for me might not work for you, might not work for Darren. So it's hard to react in a scenario when you're going to default what works for you and it might not be what they need. So it's already putting in place this things so that people can anchor themselves. I'm fortunate, I learned through sport. Yeah, I hate losing, still hate losing. I can't play board games. My family love board games. I can't play them because I can't enjoy them, because I do hate losing that much. But yet, if you were in a team that I led, you wouldn't realise that, I don't think, because I'm incredibly competitive myself. But that's why I think I make a better coach than I do a player, because the way in which I coach is much more everything I've spoken to you about today. I still know me as an individual struggle with all the things I spoke about today if it was me. So I think it's much more around understanding the people in your team. Get to know the people in your team, and then you'll know how best to help them through those scenarios.
And I think it links back to a model that I really love, Radical Candor by Kim Scott, where we can look at this feedback in two ways of feedback we give people, but also feedback we give ourselves, is that we care personally, but we challenge directly. Because actually the care personally is we want them to be the best that they can be. And I think internally we need to do that for ourselves. So if we're hurting, it's great. We've got to challenge ourselves directly, saying what could have I done differently? But also we're doing that because we care personally about ourselves or about others to make sure we're giving that feedback. I think that's a real nuance in the environment that you're creating there, is you're getting to know your people because you care personally about them, but you're not hiding away from those conversations when you go, no, we should have won, or we should have done A, B, C. what we can do differently next time.
No, really interesting. Wasn't one that I was aware of, so it wasn't a conscious effort from me, but it is. It's people first, and we joke about it in the office. I stick a post-it note on our team manager's monitor, and he's still got it there. Team managers, essentially, it's something that exists in racing, doesn't exist in a lot of UK sports. It exists in American ones. It's basically like almost like the pastoral support. So they're not like we'd think manager as in football manager. No, they're like the player care stuff. They're the one that touches base with the drivers every single day and does that side of things. Or I know even like planning the operational side. But anyway, I put a post-it note on his monitor that's a joke that came up in a meeting once when we were talking about, it's just hashtag know your drivers, and that's there for him. The hashtag was more the mean part of it. Obviously it doesn't have a hashtag, but feel free to steal it if you want. And then for me, mine is, the reason I gave that to him is because in my head all the time is like, I need to know the people. And don't get me wrong, there are some people within our organisation, it's huge, and there's some people which might leave our organisation and I never really got to know them. I don't have regrets, but that's always one thing that I wish that I could change, because there's no excuse really. I just need to prioritise better, but it's so important to know the people that work with you.
That's something I've definitely learned in my career, and when I guess probably started off in that early management, or when they were so almost like the old school management style, where I was told you don't become friendly with people, like your manager's over here and then your people are over here, and very autocratic. And I learned pretty quickly that didn't work, and actually get to know people. And I've been the other way as well, when I've got a little bit too friendly with people, and then when you do have to have those challenging conversations, that's tricky. But do you know what, I'd rather be on the side of understand who you're working with, understand the human behind it. And then those difficult conversations aren't difficult. They might be a little bit challenging, or we might have to be brave to go and have those conversations. But when we understand the person behind it, we can then communicate in a way that makes sense for them. Ben, just last part in terms of high performance, I'm interested to pick your brains about marginal gains. And it's something that I'm a firm believer in. And we mentioned it right at the start around sometimes if we look too much at the end result and what we're trying to achieve, and we've got to have that vision. We've got to aim for something, the first place, the multiple championships over the next 5 years, whatever it might be. So we need to have that target. But just talk to me about marginal gains and how that works in creating high performing teams.
Yeah, I think that comes back to accountability again. I think the important thing is to have clear but not fixed remits. So if you're really wanting marginal gains, then you do need to look in the most sort of, finest of margins. And that's not easy especially like if you look at it from what we talked about earlier, my lens of holistic development. I'm trying to look 360, but then still look at 1% within 360. So I think it is important to, if it's just you for yourself, to kind of don't get regimented and really structured and go, all right, I'm going to look at this here, this here, this here, this here, but actually go, give yourself a small focus. So don't go, right, January's the classic example. It's January, I'm going to completely change myself. No one says that, but that's actually what it translates as a lot of time. I'm going to complete my change myself. So I'm going to do dry January. I'm also going to try and have 6 meals a month, which don't have meat in them. I'm going to try and do this diet. I'm going to do that. And thinking, you're not going to do that. Like, I'm not down you, but the chances are, unless you're that super dialed in, hyper focused elite athlete that we spoke about, or not necessarily elite athlete, but just that kind of person, you're probably not going to achieve that. So why don't you just go, right, what area am I going to dig deeper into? And let's optimize that area. And then once I've got that, I've still got all the other great things I'm doing, but I'm going to be that 1% better. And then just taking it in that sort of strategic, sort of almost modular approach. But I don't want to say that it's modular, because it's still holistic, because you're still trying to think about something that isn't your number one objective or something that's directly linked to your job. But that would be my advice to somebody. And I see this in an F1 team in the fact that we've got so many departments. One of the hardest things for us initially, as we've grown as a team, was to try and break silos, because there are so many little areas that people work in that people are high performing and they become fixated on what they're doing and they perhaps lose sight of the bigger picture. So it is difficult. I think we're doing not quite an incredible job, but we're doing an impressive job at improving in this area. Not being at the pinnacle, because there's always room for improvement, but we're improving in this area and actually start looking at how what I do might impact someone else and how can I then help that person. And that's marginal gains within a business, because we're big believers in one of our behaviours that underpins the values is collaborating with purpose. And I've always talked about collaboration, but before Williams, I hadn't really talked about collaborating with purpose. And actually it completely changes the meaning for me, because just collaborating for the sake of collaborating, yeah, it's nice. And you might build a new relationship that's going to help you in the future and in some point. But actually, don't just collaborate for the sake of collaborating. Why are you collaborating? And that's how you're going to find a marginal gain. We've all been there where you have meetings for the sake of meetings and it's just all talk, no action. I think when you work in F1, you realise the need to drive action and change, and how to do that by breaking down silos and collaborating with purpose.
And I think it goes back to systematic leadership, systematic change. We can use an F1 as an analogy. You could get the best parts of every single team's car and put it together, and it wouldn't make the best car. It's actually how all those teams work together, how those components interact with one another to look at that end goal of how we can produce the best car, not the best individual pieces of it. And I think that's what you're describing there, is actually our goal is this, and everyone needs to drive towards that. And that sometimes means, as a leader, we've only got to take our team to 80% instead of 100%, because that allows another area to achieve 100% that allows us to achieve our goals.
Yeah, agreed. And the other thing, just to add on that I've learned from being in F1 that perhaps I didn't look at, particularly when I was in education as much, is actually how you properly track and measure performance. And James Vowles has publicly spoke about it for us in terms of the spreadsheet that we used to use to build a car, and has been open about it in terms of that's not where we should be now. But actually, I'm not going to go into it today, but just some of the things that Williams are working with their partners on at the moment to just revolutionise the way in which we work together, the way in which we track things, the way in which we use technology to ensure that we're all on the same page is really, really impressive. And you look at the top of the building, we've got at the top of the business, we've got over 1,000 employees, but you can almost narrow that down into eventually sort of like 3 KPIs that everybody's working on. And there was a book about how to make the boat go faster. For me, I talk a lot about how to make the car go faster, because actually you could be working in marketing, but you're still making that car go faster, and you need to understand that, because you should feel part of something. And actually there's a reason your job wouldn't exist in an F1 team if it didn't make the car go faster. And that's marketing, HR, finance, esports. It could be in any area of the business, but I think it's really important for us to recognise that we're all pushing in the same direction, and we're all going to have an influence on how those 2 drivers that get in that car perform on track.
And how do you celebrate success? Because I guess the definition of success in F1 car is to win a race, which a lot of that is outside of your control. So how do you use, whether it's the marginal gains, whether it's those KRAs, to create a culture of celebrating those small wins instead of just focusing on that big goal that's at the end?
Yeah, I think the public perception of success in F1 is winning the race. And yeah, a lot of things have to fall into place in order to win a race. Initially, you have to have a car capable of being at the front of the pack. I think for us, I'm not here to speak about the F1 side too much, but I think if you look at it transparent from a Williams perspective, we want a car that's competitive and in the fight for points. That's success. And I think if you look at it as finishing P11 might hurt, because for those of you that don't know, that's just outside the points. But if you finish P11 and you had a car that could have got you in the points, that's still success. You still can be disappointed because it doesn't change the table because no points have been added to your score. But you know that you're doing the right thing. You're getting in the right place. There might have been the wrong call from a strategist or engineer, and that's a mistake and we have to own that. But we know then that's an area of improvement. But we know the car was actually quick enough to get the points. I think in sim racing, we have a kind of a luxury position in a way, but it's also a trial for us. It's an area that Williams is incredibly successful in at the moment, and we're starting to. I spoke about plan earlier. Williams have got a plan, and that plan means being at the forefront, and we're on course for where we want to be. In sim racing, we're a few steps ahead in that plan, and we're already challenging for wins. We're already gaining wins. We were the first non-US team to win eNASCAR last year, which is a massive competition, and we didn't just win the team championship, we won the drivers as well. So we are successful. But for me, success in eNASCAR came before we won the championship. It come because if you jump in a call with the drivers, with the team, it was a nice place to be. It was nice because, not because everyone was partying and everyone was happy, but everyone was lifelong learners. Everyone was constantly trying to improve and enjoying the process. Yes, we had a good feeling that we were going to be we were challenging for playoffs, and there's a chance we were going to make them and be in the final. But that wasn't the focus. That was almost the cherry on top. That was the reward. And it's similar in F1 sim racing at the moment. When I joined, the team were 10th out of 10th, and they scored 5 points in the season. This year we're 8 races in out of 12. We're on 104 points, and we're 4th in the championship and 2nd in the drivers' championship. And I spoke about the interview earlier when it just come up a couple of times, that what the presenter said to me at that point, but they were like, this isn't a surprise for us. Okay, maybe when we were, at one point, we were top of both championships. Yeah, that 100% was a surprise. But we expected to make progress because for 18 months we've been on this plan. And it doesn't come as a surprise. And we've celebrated lots of wins along the way. We don't fixate on any of them. I was told by a very wise man who's recently retired as a footballer and is now coaching, but he wanted to help me help others who were wired in a similar way. He actually lives in the Reading area. He said to me, my advice to any youngster, and I'm happy to give it myself if you want me to speak to him, would be, don't ride the highs too high and you won't feel the lows too low. And that's something that stuck with me, and we do the same. But it doesn't mean you can't celebrate wins. But I don't think any of them you need to be hitting here, because there's more chance of crashing down to here.
Yeah, absolutely. One more thought in terms of talk sort of internally within Williams. Is there any comparison to what other organisations, other cars, other engineers are doing? Because in my world, I look at business and then also individuals, comparisons with others is quite damaging. And from a business point of view, yes, be aware of what your competitors are and what they do. But for us, like, don't focus too much on that. How does that work? How does that play out in your world?
Yeah, I'll be completely honest with you. I'm not going to go into it from a Williams perspective, but what I can do is from my view and my perspective. Obviously, some of that will come from Williams and will come from other teams I've been in. But I'm also in that school of thought of that comparison to others can be harmful. I think there's a lot of correlations now coming through from the mental health side, in terms of negative mental health, in terms of how that can impact you, particularly with the use of social media and how you compare yourself to others there. So that's something I've been aware of for quite a while. One of my roles throughout all of my career, pretty much, well, since education, has been as like a safeguarding lead or head of safeguarding for a club or for a league. So this is quite prominent in my thoughts, and I've had this conversation with young and vulnerable people a number of times, just to kind of help them challenge their beliefs in terms of just how much pressure they put on themselves based on others. And particularly social media, you put your best foot forward, don't you, on there? So actually, yeah, my life, for example, on there is spending a lot of time in amazing countries, on a plane, going to incredible experiences, which is true. But what you don't see is what you see today, the guy with bags under his eyes that's trying to just keep himself afloat at times. Obviously, that's a joke, and I do to put a lot of effort into trying to look after myself. But the point is, you don't see the hard parts. You just see what people want you to see. From a team perspective, it's the same. Comparing against others can be harmful. When you're in a competitive environment, there is a benefit sometimes for comparison. But when I say comparison, that's the sort of sense checking where you're at. That's not because it's we want to be where they are or what are they doing here. It's right, let's say you're a midfield team and you need that kind of like where are we? Let's look, whereabouts are we in where we want to be? And we go, right, we have outperformed that team at the last 3 tracks. So therefore, we're where we want to be relative to others, and we can use it just for a cross-check, but it shouldn't be the driving force behind what we're trying to do. In football and in rugby terms, and I'm sure you've both experienced it yourself, is a lot of managers, it's about them. And it's a tactical mastermind, and it's almost like, right, this team do this, so I'm just going to flex and I'm going to show that I can do this to counter them. And you might win the game. Chances are, though, you're going to make mistakes along the journey because you're not focusing on your super strength. You're just focusing on someone else's strength, and you're trying to match their strength. Whereas, I mean, I probably wouldn't last very long in football management. Maybe one day we'll see if I get the opportunity. But like, I'm much more of a focus on your super strengths kind of guy, and that's my team can play this way and we can play this way well, and if we focus on that and those marginal gains, then we can beat anyone in what we do. So we shouldn't be worrying about what they do in order to match it. And I think in my experiences, I've had limited experience in a non-sporting business, if I'm being honest. Most of my career, I gravitate towards those kind of roles or education, which is a different world entirely. But I believe the same thing happens in business a lot of the time. And it's the point that I don't know for a fact, but I look at like the pandemic and I'm like, some businesses did really well in the pandemic. And I think some businesses did really well in the way they approached their staff and looking after their staff. And I'm no expert in business at all. So feel free to cut this. But I look at it and go, I wouldn't mind betting, because I know how I did. I was a senior leader in school at the time. How I approached things was, it was people first. And it was about just looking after our own, essentially. And I wasn't worried how the school down the road was doing. I might look at what they're doing in order to help look after my people, but I wasn't thinking, what GCSE results are they going to get in comparison to us? And I think a lot of companies probably took a similar approach and started just going, how do we get through this? How do we look after our people and our business? Not how do we outperform, Amazon? How do we outperform this person? But yet, I don't know, maybe you know, maybe none of us know, but I feel like people have defaulted back to their old ways now. And I'm noticing in businesses, a lot of them are against work from home because they've gone back to this like, no, we need people in because I need to be able to see you, which doesn't feel very trusting. There's a benefit of having people in, don't get me wrong. I think there's a real benefit. And if I can work in an office with people, I will. But there's also times when I've got to do that boring stuff that I don't like, which is admin, and I'm a people person. As you know, I can talk. So therefore, it's not the right environment for me. Yeah. So I think there's too much comparison that goes on that can hurt performance. It's the simple answer that would have probably saved you 10 minutes of listening to me.
No, I agree. And I think the big message out of there for me is focus on your superpower, your own superpower, and focus on the superpower of those around you. And yeah, there's a bit of benchmarking against others, but even, I'm talking like individual level, it doesn't help. And I see it all the time in business and coaching of, well, this person's doing this and that person's achieved that. Don't worry about them. Focus on what you can do and what you can control to move things forwards.
I think as well, it really highlights for me the importance of the why for you, because we've basically gone back to the start of the interview where you talking about your why. And as businesses, as individuals, stay with your why, because that's where your success will come from. Your principles, your values, your purpose, that will define that success. If we start looking outside of that, we're taking someone else's why and trying to plug that in somewhere to create success. That's focusing on a result. That's focusing on the get. Let's focus on ourselves, the give, the people, and that's where success will be driven from.
I think I need to start taking you round with me, Darren, because it could save people a lot of time, because you could just summarise what I want to say in a concise period of time. So thank you.
Ben, very last thing, at the end of each episode, we do top 3 leadership soundbites. So what are your top 3 tips for anyone that's listened to this based on what we've been talking about today?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I should probably ask Darren what my top 3 are, because he'll probably get there quicker than me. Great question. I think it's really, really useful for people to be able to take that away. I think for me, culture and focusing on that culture. Obviously, my preference is a value-driven culture. I think as long as you believe in it and you understand why you want that culture, it doesn't necessarily have to be value-driven. But for me, I struggle to see a way that's going to be easier to have impact than with that. So I kind of see that as like the foundations, if you like. Then I'd kind of move on, and I think it's got to be something related to people. Obviously people play into the culture, but I guess I've said foundation, so I guess kind of like the main body of a building, if we're going to go that way now. The next bit would be that main body, which is the people. For me, get to know your people. They are people before they were a member of staff or before they were a member of your team. So it's so important and shouldn't be neglected. If I ever move on from Williams into a new role, I would be being very transparent with that business, or maybe it's my own business, but of that first bit of time is protected as much as possible to just get to know the people that are in the building. So yeah, people would be the main body. And then I guess, last one, sticking with my theme, we go maybe the bit on top would be championing growth. And by that, I mean holistic growth. And that's, for me, on and off the track, but in a business perspective, that's in work and out of work. And it comes back to that people piece. I think genuinely trying to create an environment where you are developing people. But that does come down to the knowing your people and culture. They all link, because I think you've got to create an environment where people feel they have the autonomy, they have that psychological safety, where they can start striving for more and they can be innovative in their approach. So yeah, unintentionally there, we've kind of got culture as foundation, the people that make up all of it, to be honest, getting to know them. And then once you've got to know them and you've got the right culture, you can then start helping them and your business grow as a result.
Ben, that was brilliant. I knew you'd be good, and that was even better than I was expecting. So thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it, and I could talk to you guys all day.
You're welcome back anytime. Darren, that was amazing. Like, how good was Ben during that?
Yeah, it was really, really good, with so many insights that I'm taking away, that sometimes we separate these elite companies from where we work, and actually there were loads of takeaways that I think everyone could adapt or change in their lives.
Yeah, it was a big learning aspect for me, being in exposure to that elite level, high performance, and thinking about how can I take that and how can I bring that into my world. And I'm a big believer in high performance, and that not just being at what we'd say the elite of, say, F1, but we can all deliver on high performance. What were your sort of big takeaways from what Ben was talking about that we could implement?
So I think, the overarching subject was always related to that why. And I think Ben's why was so clear throughout. And Ben's why had such a clear link to people, getting to know people, learning their strengths, adapting our feedback for them to learn from their mistakes and become and move to their natural best. That I think in the end sort of pushes everything. And that's what pushes performance, is actually it starts with the people. It's about them reaching their potential, them reaching their best, their ideas, their innovation. That's what drives that performance and makes Ben and Williams F1 such a fantastic place to work.
I agree. And that to me is the thing that we can all do. We can all go and find out something about the people that we work with. And I'd encourage you to go and do that now. Go and find out about that individual in the team. Go and find out what triggers them, what motivates them, what inspires them. Because I think the more we understand people, the more we can then collaborate with purpose, as Ben said, and then we can achieve what we need to achieve in our businesses. Darren, thank you for being on the show again and giving your insight as always. A big thank you to Ben for sharing his thoughts on high performance and how to get the best out of people. Thank you all for listening to the show, and don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll see you next time on Sound Leadership.
The Sound Leadership podcast was produced by Media First. To learn more about the media crisis and communications training, visit mediafirst.co.uk. The editor and producer was Darren Wingham. The show was hosted, written and researched by me, Dan Boniface. A special thanks to all the team at Media First and the BCF Group for supporting the development of this podcast. To learn more about the management, leadership, training and coaching that the BCF Group offer, visit thebcfgroup.co.uk or get in touch by emailing hello@thebcfgroup.co.uk. Finally, a special thanks to our exceptional guest today, who you can contact via the BCF Group.